Hello, my name is David. I'm going to talk to you today about a subject which is very deep in my heart. There's a great saying which is, unless you have a cause you're prepared to die for, you don't have a right to live. The cause I'm prepared to die for is preventing domestic violence. This is a poem which I wrote about that subject. Afterwards, I'll explain about the themes of each verse. There are no excuses for those evil mongrels who commit acts of violence against another human being. Domestic violence are words or actions of violence. Is that what you are seeing? Politicians and magistrates don't make or enforce laws which are anywhere near strong enough to prevent domestic violence crime. Despite our best efforts, our pleas, they continue to fail us, time after painful time. There are cowards who use alcohol as a pathetic excuse to commit an act of domestic violence. How dare they? I refuse to succumb. This is no time for silence. If someone claims to love another person, whether they be their partner or child, when they commit an act of domestic violence, those claims end. I will not be reconciled. Some children are witnesses or victims of domestic violence every single day. Many imitate that violence when they become adults. Such evil cycles of violence must be stopped. Today, victims, such as me, deserve all your love and support, and practical measures too. I'll do all I can to prevent domestic violence crime. Will you? Let's look at that first verse. There are no excuses for those evil mongrels who commit acts of violence against another human being. Domestic violence are words, are actions of violence. Is that what you are seeing? Domestic violence is violence. That's a fact. It's sad but true that so many people, maybe even you, when you hear that someone is bashed or murdered, that you feel sad for the victim, and anger, maybe even hatred for the mongrel who committed that evil act. But when you hear the victim was a victim of domestic violence, that society at large tends to think, well, the victim may have had a hard day. No, let's just not call him a criminal, just the perpetrator. The perpetrator might have had a hard day. Maybe they had an argument. Maybe the perpetrator had been under a lot of stress at work, or had a hard childhood, or there could have been financial issues. It might have even been near culture. Maybe the perpetrator just had a few too many drinks. Maybe. We need to change our attitude now. I repeat, domestic violence is violence. Victims are victims. Those who commit domestic violence are criminals, or as I prefer to call them, evil mongrels. Certainly not perpetrators. No excuses are accepted. Domestic violence isn't just about actions, it's about words as well. Words can take the form of disgusting swear words, which can cause the victim to feel degraded, humiliated, devoid of respect. Respect is something we all have a right to. Words can take the forms of threats, such as, unless you do this, I'll bash the hell out of you. I'll take away all your money and your children, and you'll be kicked out of here onto the streets. And don't even think of telling anyone or I'll even bash you even harder. That's domestic violence for you. If you see it, report it. If you hear it or suspect it, report it. You have a moral obligation to do so, don't you? Let's have a look at verse 2. Politicians and magistrates don't make or enforce laws which are anywhere near strong enough to prevent domestic violence crime. Despite our best efforts, our pleas, they continue to fail us, time after painful time. I once confronted a politician about why they don't make tougher laws on criminals who use domestic violence. He said, "But if we make tougher laws, it won't prevent domestic violence. Instead, the perpetrators might think, I may as well murder the victim." When I said, "Bring in longer sentences for murder," he said, "Oh, didn't think of that." That shows how hard it is for politicians to see common sense. Politicians generally tend to be governed by self-interest, on protecting their position, and like to be seen to be doing something, when in fact they are doing nothing. If politicians had the common sense, the intelligence, the ability and bravery to bring in laws, tough laws, with long sentences for the criminals who commit domestic violence, then it would help victims to feel more safe. It would help potential criminals to think, wait on, if I say or do this, I'll go to jail for a very long time. And we may develop some respect, even admiration for such politicians. Magistrates generally are irresponsible losers who proclaim to know a lot, but in reality know nothing, especially about the consequences of them handling out sickeningly light sentences to criminals who commit domestic violence crime. If magistrates had any morals, if they cared even one little bit about victims, past, present and future, they would enforce much stronger laws for domestic violence criminals. But having morals, having concern for the safety of victims, is not in the character profile of magistrates. Verse 3. There are cowards who use alcohol as a pathetic excuse to commit an act of domestic violence. How dare they? There is no excuse. I refuse to succumb. This is no time for silence. I've heard countless times reports of people who attacked their victim and then say they had a few drinks of alcohol, so they didn't know what they were doing. What makes it even worse is that the friends of the criminal who use domestic violence and society at large, including magistrates, accept that excuse. How can people be so stupid? Respectful communication between individuals is a fundamental principle of relationships. However, as an act of cowardice, rather than show respect for another or make the effort to say what's troubling them, so many criminals drink alcohol to gain so-called courage and then attack their victims. I've often heard reports of footballers who are celebrating a victory or mourning a loss. They get drunk, bash their partner, often in front of their children, then get a lighter sentence, if any sentence at all, and then their teammates and other current and former footballers say what a wonderful person that criminal is. Maybe they say it because they use domestic violence as well. How dare they? Footballers who use domestic violence should be forbidden from ever playing again. And then they should go to jail. Alcohol is a poisonous weapon used by many to verbally or physically attack victims of domestic violence. Instead of bringing up sports people and indeed society at large to have respect for their partners and children and to keep alcohol drinking to a minimum, we are bringing them up with the belief that the only way to celebrate or even behave is to get drunk. Our toleration attitude must change now. I call footballers, indeed anyone who uses alcohol as an excuse to commit an act of domestic violence, pathetic scum. Next time you hear reports of criminals who use alcohol as an excuse so they get a lighter sentence and then are supported by their friends, or should I say cohorts, will you, society at large, tolerate it and accept it and say it's okay? Or will you speak out, just like me? Verse 4. If someone claims to love another person, whether they be their partner or child, when they commit an act of domestic violence, those claims end. I will not be reconciled. I believe the words love and respect are the most beautiful, most important words in our language. As such, it makes me sick and I shake my head in disbelief when criminals who use domestic violence claim to truly love their partner or child. If someone truly loves their partner or child, then they don't use domestic violence. Plain and simple. No degree of violence is acceptable. When someone tells me they use domestic violence and then says they love the victim, I say, liar. It's important here to note that criminals use the word love as a tool to tell their victim, after attacking them, they are sorry and they really do love their victim. Most people yearn so much for love in our lives that we tend to accept the violence by others if the violence is then followed by the word love. It's a reason why so many victims are brainwashed into thinking their partner really does love them, even though they use domestic violence against them. The fact is that love and domestic violence cannot coexist. Criminals who manipulate the word love to control and attack their victims are the lowest form of life. If you are a victim, be brave, be strong, learn to love yourself and see the true love and support of others, and leave the relationship you are currently having with someone who claims to love you, but in reality are using the word love as a manipulative tool. Leave them. You deserve better, don't you? Some children are witnesses or victims of domestic violence every single day. Many imitate that violence when they become adults. Such evil cycles of violence must be stopped today. I've met several ladies in the past few years who were raped by their fathers. To hear them talk about what happened made me cry. It also made me sick. Not only that, but when they said their fathers didn't even get sent to jail for one day, I felt incredibly angry. For someone to sexually assault, to rape, to viciously attack a child is the action of a beast not worthy to remain alive. The death penalty should be reintroduced for such beasts, or else they should be sent to jail, never to be released. When a criminal attacks his or her partner and their child listens and watches, what message does that send to the child? It sends a message that domestic violence is acceptable And when they get older, they'll imitate that violence. After all, you don't treat your partner with respect. When they do something you don't like, go ahead and verbally or physically attack them. That's the message a child learns. Sad, but true. When you have an argument with a loved one, feel free to express your issues with love and respect for the other person, whether or not your children are listening. And how about you teach your child and show your child the true meaning and importance of the word respect? To do so will help prevent your child from becoming a criminal or a victim of domestic violence. The responsibility is in your hands. Before I talk about the last verse of my poem, I'd like to mention two other issues to deal with domestic violence. The first is that regardless of whether or not you've said or done something quite silly which really annoyed your partner, or you might not have been the most pleasant form of yourself recently. You might have even been feeling a bit down or lacking in confidence. You do not deserve to be a victim of domestic violence. Nobody deserves to be a victim of domestic violence. Don't blame yourself. Do blame the perpetrator, or as I keep on saying in this broadcast, the criminal. Your body, your thoughts, your feelings deserve to be treated with respect. Anybody who doesn't show that to you does not deserve to be in your life, or anyone else's life for that matter. Tell yourself, I deserve better. The other issue is about the deadly impact social media has on relationships and, of course, domestic violence. People of all ages, even children as young as 3 or 4, have accessed pornography. I even read of a case where in a classroom, while the teacher was talking about history, the students were viewing pornography on their computer. Just as I've tried to convince you that the word perpetrator should be replaced by the word criminal, I also feel the word pornography should be replaced by the words sexual violence. That's a more accurate description. After all, how else could you describe scenes in which one person repeatedly slaps a victim, in which a victim says they enjoy being raped, in which one victim says no, the attacker takes that as meaning yes, in which there are no moral boundaries, in which this language shows total lack of respect for each other than sexual violence. Thanks to social media, the sexual violence on social media, domestic violence rates have increased enormously. If those in charge of social media had any responsibility at all, they wouldn't allow sexual violence to be shown on social media. Schools shouldn't allow social media to be used at all, and parents have a responsibility to themselves and to their children to not allow sexual violence to be available in their homes. Healthy relationships have been hijacked by social media. The result is catastrophic. Things must change now. The last lines of my poem on domestic violence are, victims such as me deserve all your love and support, and practical measures too. I'll do all I can to prevent domestic violence crime. Will you? In terms of love and support, many of us have found it hard to know how to find it and who to talk to. I'll never forget the stories of a couple of victims. They told me they reached out after being raped by a family member to some members of the clergy. and they were raped by them as well. As a male victim, I naively, bravely have spoken to some everyday people who told me that I must have asked for it. It was just a figment of my imagination, and I was even asked if I enjoyed it. Those comments have made my recovery so much harder, so more painful. A few years ago, when I finally felt comfortable about talking about my trauma, I joined a group who I thought would provide support. However, after bravely telling my story, I was told it's best not to talk about such things in case it upsets anyone. Honestly. Now I'm in the process of establishing my own group in which victims of domestic violence can connect with each other, can communicate in a way which other victims can relate and understand. Such groups are desperately needed. Access for victims to various services such as accommodation and support networks is hard to find, and when it is found, it's generally inadequate. The safety of victims is put at risk by making it more stressful, even traumatizing, when we do speak out. I'll never forget, unfortunately, being interrogated by the police as if I was a criminal, not the victim. I left the police station thinking, no wonder so few victims speak out. Things must change now. Victims need to be encouraged to speak out, to take actions, with support mechanisms in place and in total safety. Support services of all types should be more available. Perpetrators, criminals, must not be allowed to contact their victims and or their children, even if they say such things as they've seen the light and are now a born-again Christian. Long jail sentences are necessary for all domestic violence criminals. No excuses accepted. So, how well have you been listening to this broadcast? I've got a quiz for you. Question 1. Those who commit acts of domestic violence are A, perpetrators, or B, criminals. The answer is criminals. Question 2. When a criminal is given a light sentence, if any, and then murders their victim, who they attacked in the first place, the blood of the victim is on the hands of A, the criminal, B, the politicians for not having the decency to make strong enough laws to prevent domestic violence crime, or C, magistrates who look after their own interests instead of the general public. The answer is all of the above. Question 3. The word pornography should be replaced by what words? The answer is sexual violence. Question 4. Are there any excuses allowed to commit domestic violence crime? The answer is no. Question 5. Can love and domestic violence coexist? The answer is no. Next question. When a domestic violence criminal apologises and says they've changed their ways, should he or she ever be allowed access to the victim ever again? The answer is no. One final question for you. Next time you suspect someone is in danger of being another victim of domestic violence crime, what are you going to do? The answer is in your hands. Thank you. For more information on how to contact me, please see further details in the bio below.